The content of this podcast has not been evaluated by Health Canada or the FDA. It is educational in nature and should not be taken as medical advice. Always consult a qualified medical professional to see if a diet, lifestyle change, or supplement is right for you. Any supplements mentioned are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Please note that the opinions of the guests or hosts are their own and may not reflect those of Advanced Orthomolecular Research Incorporated. Welcome to Supplementing Health, a podcast presented by Advanced Orthomolecular Research. We are all about applying evidence-based and effective dietary, lifestyle, and natural health product strategies for your optimal health. In each episode, we will feature very engaging clinicians and experts from the world of functional and naturopathic medicine to help achieve our mission to empower people to live their best lives naturally. Now, where did I put those keys? And why was I in this room again? It can be frustrating when we start to become forgetful with age. However, you can support your memory and brain function with Vimpo 15. AOR's Vimpo 15 delivers a clinically effective dose of vimpositin, a modified compound originally found in periwinkle plant, to support blood flow, oxygen, and nutrient delivery to the brain, helping to maintain cognitive health as we age. You can learn more about this amazing product at aor.ca or aor.us. Hi everyone, welcome back to Supplementing Health. With the new year brings an influx of people who are focused on upping their athletic activity, which is awesome. So today I am chatting with Dr. Mandy Swindon about how the menstrual cycle impacts competitive athletes and active individuals. Dr. Mandy is a naturopathic doctor and is passionate about sports medicine, and she loves helping her patients achieve their athletic goals. Welcome, Mandy.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you have a fairly diverse athletic background yourself, which I assume has helped fuel your passion for sports medicine, correct?
Yes. I've always been an athlete. I've always participated in some sport.
Awesome. So I thought maybe before we dive into our topic fully, we could talk a little bit about your athletic background and some of the accomplishments that you've done yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I started like most little kids with soccer. It's pretty basic sport, and gymnastics. And then just from there, did every sport I possibly could. The two sports I took the furthest were basketball and rugby. So basketball, I played varsity for the University of Windsor. And we did decently well that season that I played. And then rugby, the highest level I played was Division I in the States. So I played for Detroit when I lived in Windsor. And one of my greatest accomplishments was my team finished second at nationals. I think it was 2007, 2008 season. And then, yeah, thank you. It was a long time ago, but that was one of my highlights. And then, I mean, since then I've been a competitive CrossFitter and haven't done anything like crazy in the CrossFit world. I mostly just do local competitions. And then I've just dabbled in a bunch of other things. I've done a few triathlons, a bunch of different running races, different distances, 5K, 10K, one marathon. Probably won't do another marathon. Already checked that off the bucket list. And a couple of bodybuilding competitions. So I just like to switch it up and just be able to relate to all my patients. So if there's a sport that I haven't tried, depending on what it is, I like to try it and be able to speak authentically about it.
That's very cool. That's quite the gamut of things that you've done and dabbled in, which is awesome. So researchers have found that 71% of athletes report feeling worse just before their menstrual period. Can you explain why that is, and is that inevitable?
Oh yeah, the late luteal phase. So common, and not just in athletes, but I think women in general feel pretty crappy the week, sometimes even 2 weeks before their period. And it's really goes down to hormonal shifts. So during the luteal phase. And just for your listeners who aren't familiar with what that term means, the luteal phase is the second half of your menstrual cycle. So the first half being when you're on your period, so when you're bleeding, and then all the way to you ovulate. So after ovulation until your next bleed, that is what we call the luteal phase. And that is the high hormone phase of your cycle. And this, of course, is if you're not on any hormonal contraceptive, so just your natural hormone rhythm. And so that high hormone phase can be problematic for some women, depending on the levels of their hormones and their nutritional status. Lots of factors influence that, but we can feel really crappy if that ratio, so the ratio of estrogen and progesterone, is not ideal, and if our hormones drop really aggressively. So it's normal for our hormones to be higher and then they drop, and that drop in hormones is what signals the release of the lining, which is our period. So if it's a big drop, if it's an aggressive drop, or if during the high hormone phase those ratios aren't ideal, then that can contribute to women in general feeling really crappy. But then athletes especially may notice excuse me, detrimental effects to their performance or sleep or what have you. And often they're more in tune with their body. So even if it's minor shifts in how they're feeling, they really notice those shifts.
So when I was growing up, I was told that it can be normal for active women to skip their menstrual cycle, or in some cases completely stop menstruating. Since I've grown up, I've also heard this referred to as amenorrhea. I may have totally butchered that word.
Amenorrhea, yeah. Yeah, I definitely have believed that as well growing up. But that isn't normal. It's common, but just because it's common doesn't mean it's normal. And that can be largely attributed to just an energy imbalance. So we used to call this female athlete triad, and now it's more of a relative energy deficiency. So if you are burning a lot more calories in your activity and not fueling appropriately, so not eating enough calories, and it's not even just about calories, but macronutrients. So enough carbs, enough fat, enough protein. We need all of them, and enough of the micronutrients in order to build a healthy lining, build a healthy follicle, a healthy egg, and release that lining. So having your period. Having a really low body fat percentage can contribute to this as well. And a healthy body, obviously with some sports, as an athlete, you need to be pretty lean, but at what cost? And that's always a conversation that needs to be had. I mean, sometimes as an athlete, you're willing to sacrifice your health a little bit for a short period of time, for performing well in your sport. But obviously you don't want to be not in a healthy body composition for long periods of time.
And so some people believe that it's most likely to show up, or this condition's unique to endurance athletes or high level athletes, but it can be something that shows up in anyone who's active, could it not?
Yeah, and it's not even just an athlete thing. I mean, if you can be obese and still get amenorrhea, or even overweight and have amenorrhea. So for women, our hormones are very sensitive to caloric deficits. So if we take an overweight person for example, and they are trying to lose weight, and they put themselves in a really severe caloric deficit, they very likely will lose their period. And that's just because as females, if we're not providing our body with all the nutrients it needs to procreate, our body's going to be like, okay, we can't make a human right now, so let's not ovulate, let's not do those normal physiological processes that are meant to create a human.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if someone was to develop amenorrhea, should they be concerned, and are there any potential long-term detrimental effects if it goes untreated?
Yeah, we definitely should be concerned. Um, there for sure can be long-term effects. I mean, we are meant to release our lining every month. How it affects women can vary from person to person. So I and we shouldn't just be concerned about bleeding every month. I mean, there's more to having a healthy cycle than just bleeding once a month. You can have a regular period, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're ovulating. So I'll take it a step further and say that we as females and especially athletic females, because we're a little bit more at risk of this, we need to be ovulating every month. That's how we make progesterone. And progesterone is a very, very important hormone for many things. We have progesterone receptors all over our body. And one of those things is anxiety and depression. So progesterone is an anxiolytic hormone, which means it decreases anxiety. And that's something I see very commonly in my female patients. So, dealing with mental health issues and not really understanding why. And obvious, like this can be multifaceted, but one of the common reasons I see is progesterone deficiency. And this can happen. So, a goal is to be ovulating regularly. But some women, they'll achieve that. So they're ovulating, but they're still not making enough progesterone. So we want to be ovulating every month, but we also want to be ovulating really well to make enough progesterone to balance out the effects of estrogen to prevent things like anxiety, depression, and all the other great things that progesterone is responsible for.
So once someone starts taking corrective actions to fix an imbalance they have been suffering from, how long does it tend to take for them to get their menstrual cycle back or proper ovulation back?
A minimum of 3 months. So so when it comes to female hormones, it's we do need to be patient, because our hormones are cycling on a monthly rhythm, and it takes 100 days to build a healthy follicle. So having a healthy menstrual cycle is all about having healthy ovulation. And when we look at the whole process of ovulation, so the little tiny follicle and it going all the way to releasing an egg, that process is 100 days, or almost 3 months. So any intervention that we start, we have to give it a minimum of 3 months to see any significant effect from it. Often it can take longer than that, but I always tell my patients, like, we don't expect to see anything drastic until at least 3 months. But I mean, sometimes it can take a lot longer than that, a year, year and a half, sometimes even 2 years. And
Wow,
this, of
yeah.
course, depends on the history of the patient. So, for females who have been on some sort of oral contraceptive for a long time, um, it can take that can take a lot longer for your own hormones to normalize. And that's another super common thing. A lot of females have been on an oral contraceptive for a good 10 plus years.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's pretty common nowadays for people to use
Mm-hmm.
them throughout their life, right? So then, does taking an oral contraceptive positively or negatively affect athletic performance?
So based on the research, and there's not a ton of research on this, as I'm sure you're familiar with, most research is done on males, and then especially in the health and fitness space, even more. And I can't recall the exact percentage, but it's definitely over 60%, well over 60%. So most of the research is done on males. And of course, that's because females have this hormone cycle that can skew results. So kind of frustrating, but the research I've read on performance and the oral contraceptive is it does decrease performance, not significantly. And again, like I've only read a few studies on this, but decreases performance, but then can help prevent injuries. So females are much more likely to tear their ACL. This is one example, and we now know that there is a connection, a correlation with estrogen and ligament laxity. So estrogen has a lot of benefits. One of them is cell turnover, so which is good for muscle growth. So we know that in that first half of our cycle, which is called the follicular phase, when estrogen is building, women are more easily able to build strength, build muscle, but more likely to have an injury. And so cell turnover, great for building muscle, not great for our connective tissue. So it makes us more prone to injuring our ligaments or tendons.
Okay. And so performance can be kind of measured in different ways then as well, right? So does it impact performance overall, like as far as endurance and that sort of stuff? Or is it that at certain points in our phase we're more inclined for endurance activities, and then other phases we're more inclined towards those muscle building or strength building activities?
Yeah, I always tell women, like, we can do anything at any point of our cycle, but exactly as you're saying, like, we are better at strength activities during our follicular phase or during that first half of our cycle. Um, we need to take it easy, ideally, during the luteal phase. And so, but you, there's other components that in our life that can affect our cycle. And if we have the ability to control all of these aspects, maybe we train really hard the whole the whole month during each of the phases, but then we change the other aspects of our life to match our cycle more appropriately. So as an example, during the ovulatory phase, that's when our testosterone is the highest, our energy is pretty good. That's a good time to be doing social activities. Doing social activities during the luteal phase can be really draining on a lot of women. So I have I work with some high level athletes who can't necessarily control their training schedules. Like they have a coach who's making their training for them. And I don't think we can expect coaches to all have this really thorough understanding of female physiology. Hopefully we get there one day, but we're not there yet. And so these athletes can't be like, excuse me, coach, I'm in my luteal phase, can't do this workout that you have planned for me, right? So they might not be able to manipulate their training schedule, but they have control of, usually they have control of everything else in their life. So maybe during their luteal phase, they're training really hard. So then it would be a good time to not schedule social events and just take it easy, stay home, do more self-care activities. They can change their nutrition to match their hormone cycle, manipulating supplements as well. So doing all the other things, if they're able to, will just help maintain hormone balance. If they were to train really hard, plan lots of social events, maybe not have their nutrition be supporting their hormones, they're setting themselves up for something like amenorrhea or even just anovulatory cycles. So starting out as minor hormone balance, but if you do that month after month after month, those minor hormone imbalances can become bigger hormone imbalances and start to present themselves symptomatically.
That makes complete sense. Now, most athletes, though, especially as they start to level up and push themselves further, are taking control of their nutrition and are already tailoring their macros to fit their needs and making sure they get extra electrolytes or whatever it is that they need,
Mm-hmm.
micronutrients as well, to meet those needs based on what it is they're training and what phase of training they're in. So, are there certain things they need to take into consideration then as a female athlete based on where they're at in that cycle and how they're tailoring their nutrition plan?
There's a lot there, yeah, there's a lot to consider. I think one of the most important pieces of knowledge that female athletes and all females need is that our basal metabolic rate increases during the luteal phase. And that is a really bad time to be in a caloric deficit, um, and a really bad time to be decreasing carbohydrates. So it's not a crazy amount, like 300 to 500 calories of extra energy is needed during that time. But that's because we're revving a bit higher. It's just bad news if we try to put ourselves into a caloric deficit at that time. And a lot of females, once they have this information, they're like, yeah, like I do feel more hungry during that time of my cycle. Like that's usually when we crave really palatable foods like chips and cookies. And so if we don't have this information, so let's say, for example, somebody is trying to lose weight and maybe they're doing it in like a healthy way. So just like a small caloric deficit, which feels easy and doable during the first half of our cycle, but then getting into the second half, it becomes really difficult. And that's because we need 300 to 500 more calories. And of course, you can, be disciplined and like push through that, but it's not beneficial to do that. So I would say that is a really important thing to consider. Like during the luteal phase, do not try to be in a caloric deficit, and do not try to eliminate carbohydrates. So having something, and you don't have to eat crappy carbohydrates, like have some good ones, things like sweet potato, oatmeal, rice, like something starchy and not an excessive amount, but just making sure you're maintaining adequate blood sugar levels throughout the day. That's going to help prevent cravings and prevent overeating. And then once you're back into the menstrual phase and follicular phase, and even in the ovulatory phase, and potentially a few days after ovulation, if you have any body composition goals, like that's the time of your cycle to be putting yourself in a caloric deficit, but not an excessive caloric deficit. So when it comes to weight loss for females, we have to just go at snail pace, like super slow and steady will get us to achieve those goals, and not be losing our period, not be losing our ovulation, hopefully, and still achieving our goals.
Absolutely. And so then kind of in the same vein, uh, you're more likely to deplete certain minerals at an increased rate when you're training, or certain like electrolytes, things like that, right? Especially depending on
Mm-hmm.
what your chosen sport or sports are. So are there certain supplements or minerals, nutrients that you think it's extra important for female athletes to be aware of during and after their cycle?
Yeah, I would say magnesium and B vitamins are the most important, specifically for female athletes. Um, I would add in iron in there as well. So those three can make pretty big differences when it comes to performance. And it's exactly like you said, athletes are very demanding on their body. And if we're increasing that demand, we need to increase the supply. And we know that about macronutrients. So we know we need to eat more to fuel our sport, but sometimes we forget about the micronutrients, and those are really critical. And sometimes, so we talked about amenorrhea before, sometimes the amenorrhea isn't due to an energy deficiency, it's a micronutrient deficiency. Our body just doesn't have the nutrients to make healthy eggs, to build a healthy lining. Iron deficiency is the most common mineral deficiency in North America, and very, very common in females more than males, and then even more common in female athletes. And so I always recommend my female athletes get their iron levels checked, their ferritin levels checked twice a year, once during their season and once during the off season. And being aware that the normal range for ferritin, for iron, is very large, and to take whatever number comes up on the labs in conjunction with their symptoms. So if they're feeling really low energy, if they're not having a period, or sometimes they can have a really, really heavy period, that can be a symptom of iron deficiency too. But supplementing iron if it's necessary and getting iron levels to a more optimal level can be really beneficial for just feeling better in general, but also performing better in their sport. Magnesium is another one, so I mentioned that. Super important for hormone health, important for a lot of aspects of health. It's the second most common mineral deficiency in North America. So it's needed for over 700 physiological processes, and it can make a world of difference. Based on the research, it's not ergogenic, but being deficient in magnesium is ergolytic. So that just means being deficient in magnesium can be detrimental to performance, but supplementing it isn't necessarily going to make you a superstar, if that makes sense. And then B vitamins, again, really important for hormone health, specifically vitamin B6. And vitamin B5 is largely depleted with stress. And we know that exercise is a stress on the body. Yes, it's a good stress, but physiologically, it's still increasing our cortisol levels. It's still using up a lot of B5 as well as other B vitamins. It also uses up a lot of magnesium and vitamin C. So those magnesium and B vitamins, I just mentioned B5 and B6, but supplementing all of them is really beneficial. Those can help a lot with energy levels, with sleep, recovery, all that stuff. So I recommend those three. Iron only if it's necessary. So always test iron levels before supplementing it. Magnesium, B vitamins, those are very safe to take to supplement without testing blood levels. And I mean, B vitamins are water soluble anyway, so pretty tricky to test accurately. I will add in taking a biologically active B vitamin. So not just going to any old store and buying whatever B complex you find. Needs to be biologically active, just to make sure if you're going to take a supplement, if you're going to spend money on it, you want to be actually absorbing the things you're taking and being sure that your body's actually able to utilize the nutrients you're supplementing. So the form does matter. It also matters for magnesium too. I mean, this is going a little bit more in depth than maybe the purposes of this talk, but magnesium, it can very negatively affect your digestion if you're not taking the appropriate form for you. Again, like just talking about absorption, many of the cheap forms of magnesium will pull water into the GI tract and cause diarrhea, which a lot of athletes don't really want to be dealing with when they're trying to do a competitive event or even just training for a competitive event. So the form of magnesium matters as well. But those are just three of the many I usually end up recommending. I mean, it would be ideal if we could just eat healthy and get all of our micronutrients that way, but the reality is our soil is super depleted, and just our high-tech lifestyles, it's impossible to get the amount we need for some nutrients. Some others you can get enough of through diet, but for example, those three I mentioned, it's really hard to, especially as an athlete.
Yeah, absolutely. Just for our listeners, if you want more details on the forms of magnesium that are available and which ones you should be looking for, we did have an episode in season 1 earlier on. We'll post in the description which episode that was, where you can get more details on magnesium to supplement what Mandy was saying here. The other thing I wanted to touch on quick here was you were talking about ferritin testing for iron levels. Do you also do TIBC, or do you just do ferritin when you're assessing your patients?
Ideally both. I mean, the more information we have, the better. But typically doing CBC and ferritin, that can give us enough information.
Okay.
To be, and I, so usually I will get my patients to go to their family doctor to get a blood requisition just so they don't have to pay out of pocket for it. I mean, naturopathic doctors can requisition blood work, but it's not covered under Alberta Health Services. So usually that's what I recommend them do. So I'm not always in control of everything that's being tested.
Right. It's awesome though that you want to work with their MD or their family physician because I know that has been a point of contention in the past. I think we're now starting to move past it and more practitioners are working together to give patients a well-rounded care, like more 360 care. But I
Mhm.
know that wasn't always the case. So it's
No,
awesome
yeah, and
to hear
it's
that's
still hit
changing.
or miss, I would say. But usually I like it's all about the patient, right? And the patient knows their family doctor and what they'd be willing to do for them. But I always try to give my patient a speech like you are in charge of your health and like you're paying taxes like everyone else is, so you can you I don't want to use the word demanding necessarily, but um yeah, just be a participant and recognize that you have a lot more power as a patient than you think.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and so, as you were saying, our food isn't always as nutritious as we'd like to think it is. And I think part of that too is also not just the soil and the growing process, but also the fact that we live in such a fast-paced world based around convenience. It can make it really hard to get that proper nutrition at times because we grab the quick, the protein bar or the whatever it is, maybe fast food or something because we're on the go and we only have half an hour to eat and whatever it
Hmm.
might be, right? So, one way we can make that aspect of it a little easier is planning and meal prepping, right? Making meal plans, getting certain ingredients ready to go if you can, doing bigger
Hmm.
batches of stuff, that sort of thing. And I'm sure you did plenty of that, especially in like your figure competition days and maybe even with your
Yes.
CrossFit. So, do you have any tips for meal prepping that can help listeners to achieve their nutrition goals?
Um, yeah, I would say one of the most important things is just scheduling, like figuring out when you're going to do it, scheduling it into your week, scheduling in grocery shopping, and then scheduling in when you're going to cook. And I personally, I've never been one of those people. I'm just picturing in my head like all those pictures of Instagram of like five of the same thing for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the week. Like I've never been like that. I am a foodie. I get bored of things really quickly. So that's not how I meal prep. Um, and if you're like me and don't want to eat this exact same thing every single day, then I would recommend this is what I do. I'll make just batches of things. Like two or three different proteins, two or three different vegetables, a couple different starches, and then I mix and match them over just like 2 or 3 days. And then I do another meal prep day and same thing again, like just make a few batches of things and mix and match them so I'm not eating the exact same thing every single day. So yeah, scheduling in the time to grocery shop, scheduling in time to cook, really beneficial. But then also learning how to cook, and this is not something that's going to happen overnight, but that can be just save you a lot of time and make meal prep a lot more enjoyable. So when you get a feel for what flavors go well together, so what herbs and spices to use, then it takes a lot less mental effort to do the meal prepping, and then your healthy food is tastes a lot better. So you're not just eating bland food, and not using like weird sauces that have crap in them to flavor the food. And obviously, like that takes a lot of time, but it just makes meal prepping more enjoyable, makes eating the food more enjoyable. And there's so many health benefits to using herbs and spices. And getting a little bit off topic, but digestive issues are really, really common, and that's just one of the ways to help digest our food properly. Again, going back to absorption, making sure we're actually absorbing the nutrients from the food that we're eating. So just using things like ginger in cooking and garlic and onions and other herbs and spices, a lot of those have phytonutrients in them that help break down our food and help with digestion. And even taking it a little bit further, but like smelling those herbs and different scents when you're cooking can help get your digestive juices flowing. I know for athletes, as you mentioned, like we have pretty busy schedules. We don't always have time to cook everything fresh. In an ideal world, that's what we would do. But even just when you're doing meal prep or like heating up the food you've already cooked, smelling those things, getting your digestive enzymes flowing can help with the breakdown of food, absorbing all the nutrients, absorbing the macronutrients as well, and preventing digestive issues. And then you mentioned sometimes we only have a few minutes to eat or we're on the go. That's another problem I see with athletes, and not just athletes, but just busy people in general. Like, we're not sitting down to eat. We're not focusing on our food. We're not chewing thoroughly. And as a result, many people have digestive issues, and whether it's bloating or heartburn or IBS, there's lots of different ways this can present. But a very simple thing that we can do is just sitting down at a table, not being on our phones, not watching TV, taking in the smells of our food, taking just one bite at a time, chewing thoroughly, and taking a break between bites. That can help with digestion a lot, and indirectly help with performance as an athlete. Like if we're actually breaking down our food, we're getting the fuel where we need it to go, we're getting the nutrients where we need them. That's going to help with our performance later on.
Yeah, I mean, most people think digestion starts in the stomach, but really it starts in the mind even before you put food anywhere near your body, right? It triggers
Exactly.
everything there. So,
Mm-hmm.
and when you were talking about those Instagram or social media images of the same meals over and over and kind of like the bland foods, it totally
Yeah.
conjured up that image of like just classic chicken breast, broccoli, and rice that
Yes.
from like old school bodybuilding. Like,
Yeah.
you're like, I do not want to eat that.
No, I did not do that during either of my bodybuilding competition
Yeah.
preps. I was like, no. I mean, I for sure eat chicken and rice and broccoli, but not every single day. And
Yeah, no, they're
not
all
like,
good foods, just maybe not all on their own and every day, right?
yes, exactly.
So I personally am a huge fan of smoothies. I tend to drink them almost every day because it's a great way for me to get extra fruits and veggies and fiber into my diet. And I'll even throw in protein powder sometimes. So I was
Hmm.
wondering if you use smoothies at all within your nutrition plan, and what are some of the high nutrient ingredients that you try to consider throwing in or adding into a smoothie when you're building one for athletic performance?
I also love smoothies. They're such a great way to get a lot of nutrition in. And just easy. Like, they're not time consuming, and usually you can make them with frozen things, so you don't have to always have fresh fruits and veggies stocked in your fridge. There's a lot of variety you can do with smoothies. So my kind of go-to recipe, I guess, is just almond. Well, you don't even have to use almond milk necessarily, but a non-dairy liquid, I will say. So it can be water, almond milk, cashew milk, coconut milk, whatever non-dairy milk of your choice. Um, and then frozen berries, again, whatever frozen berries you want. Protein powder, avocado. It makes it have a nice creamy texture, and avocado has lots of health benefits. Spinach, like some sort of leafy green in there. And then for my female athletes, I will get them to either do flax and pumpkin seeds in their smoothie or sesame and sunflower, depending on where they are in their cycle. So that is called seed cycling. You may have heard of it, but it just involves having flax and pumpkin seeds in the first half of your cycle, so during the menstrual phase, follicular phase, and ovulation, and then the luteal phase, switching to sesame and sunflower. And that just helps balance out estrogen and progesterone. And it also gets the female athletes a little bit more connected to their cycle and paying attention to what phase of their cycle they're in. And aside from that, I mean, there's lots of other things you can put in there. I really like maca, again, especially for female athletes, and even more so during the first half of their cycle when we need to be more in a building kind of physiological state.
I had never heard of seed cycling before, so I'm definitely going to look
really?
into that more. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love throwing those things in, but never really paid attention to when I was doing which ones or whatever. So now something.
Yeah. So there's not like research specifically on seed cycling, but there is a lot of research on consuming those seeds. More so flax has the most research out of all of those seeds, but there's also some on pumpkin and just research on like consuming these seeds, and mechanism of action. There's a few different ones, but flax and pumpkin have been shown to be what's called phytoestrogenic, which means they contain phytonutrients that will bind to estrogen receptors, but in kind of a loose way. So it can have a modulating effect on your estrogen levels, meaning if your estrogen is really high, then the flax and pumpkin help lower it, or vice versa. If your estrogen levels are too low, it can help raise them.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. And so if any of our listeners wanted to get in touch with you to work with you on their own athletic journey, how could they go about doing that?
My website is currently getting a revamp. I'll give you the URL, but it's a work in progress right now. It's just drmandynd.com. So drmandyn.com. I'm most active on Instagram, and my handle is at drmandy_nd. As I mentioned to you before we started recording, I am in a sling right now because I had shoulder surgery. So texting is not easy with one hand. So I haven't, the past like week, I have not been posting regularly on Instagram, but that is where I put most of my information, and that's where people can connect with me, ask me questions, etc., and set up an appointment if they want to work with me. I also run a 12-week online program specifically about the things we've been talking about today. It's called the Hormone Performance Connection. So I post information about that program on my Instagram, and we'll get my website up to speed with all that stuff too.
It's hard to keep up with everything for sure, especially when you're in a sling, have a little one, etc. So I'm sure everybody can understand that.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mandy, for joining us today. And thank you to the listeners who have tuned in for another episode of Supplementing Health.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Supplementing Health. For more information about our guests, past shows, and future topics, please visit aor.ca/podcast or aor.us/podcast. Do you have a topic you want us to cover? We invite you to engage with us on social media to request a future topic or email us at